Yeah. Good morning, members, and welcome to this meeting of the National Park Authority on Friday, the 29th of September, at the slightly later time of 11 a.m. If we can go into the first item on the agenda, please, the roll call of members present, apologies for absence, and members' declaration of interest. I have apologies for absence from Councillors Hartshorn and Warmby in advance of that element of the agenda. Karen?
Thank you, Chair. Members, if you could confirm your attendance and any declarations of interest, please. Mr Smith.
Present and no declarations of interest.
Councillor Beer.
Present and no declarations of interest.
Mr Beresford.
Present and no declarations.
Councillor Brady.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Buckler.
Present and no declarations.
Councillor Chaplin.
Present and no declarations, and apologies for having to leave early today.
Councillor Farrell.
Present and no declarations.
Councillor Greaves.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Gregory.
Present, no declarations.
Professor Haddock Fraser.
Present and no declarations.
Councillor Hanley.
Present and no declarations.
Ms Harling.
Present and no declarations.
Councillor Hart. No. Councillor Heath. No. Councillor Huddleston.
Present and no declarations.
Councillor Murphy. No. Councillor Nash.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor O'Leary.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Potter.
Present and no declarations.
Councillor Priestley.
Present and no declarations.
Councillor Richardson.
Present, no declarations.
Miss Slack.
Present, no declarations.
Dr Swetnam.
Present, no declarations.
Mr Thompson.
Present, no declarations.
Miss Witter.
Present and no declarations.
And Councillor Woods.
Present, no declarations.
Thank you.
Thank you, members. We move on to item 2 on the agenda, which is minutes of the previous meetings of the 7th and the 28th of July. Does anyone have any comments or alterations required of those minutes?
Chairman, there was a name missed off the list. Mr Gurley next door to me.
Which sect is that, Patrick?
On the
7th. Ah, right. Yes. Councillor Gourlay's.
I have no declarations.
Yeah. By way of explanation, Councillor Gourlay's apologies had been given, which I think is why his name wasn't included. So, apologies. So, going back to, if Councillor Gourlay is appeased, going back to item 2 minutes. Any comments or questions at this stage on their accuracy? If not, can I have someone moving both, Janet, and seconded by Ginny? Thank you very much. I have not been informed of any urgent business. None being brought. We have some public participation, which has been on the paperwork before you for items 7 and 8, which we will come to. Item 5 then, Chair's briefing. If I may make... yes, my notes to myself started. August was quite quiet. September has become more busy. Toward the end of August, I attended meetings regarding the recruitment of the head of resources. The advert has gone out for that post, and we interviewed for what's Suzanne's post? For the head of landscape and engagement, and I think you're all aware that Suzanne Fletcher has been appointed to that post. I had the pleasure with the Vice Chair of attending the Chatsworth Country Fair at the invitation of Lord Burlington on the 1st of September. That was after our attendance at P&R Committee. And with James as Vice Chair, we undertook the Chief Exec's appraisal on the 5th of September. And I hope you'll be pleased to know it was a positive outcome. Well, he was anyway. Since then, I've attended meetings as Cultural Heritage and Landscape Champion with Ginny Priestley as Natural Environment, Biodiversity and Farming Champion, and Andrew Gregory as Business and Economy Champion, with relevant officers reviewing progress on various issues and giving our support and comment as and where appropriate. We did receive, for members' information, a very interesting presentation on the use of artificial intelligence in assessing change in the countryside, and the outcome of which has been, instead of it taking 4 people 6 months to do the analysis, it took the machine 6 hours, which I think is a very interesting development in the use of AI. It's in partnership with Cranfield University and others, and I thought it might make a very useful topic for a future members' forum to see how that is developing. So I think that's one, watch this space and hope that we can bring it to you. Since then, I've attended various planning committee and agenda planning meetings. And of course, I participated along with other members on the combined authority and planning committee tour on the 15th of September to our Worslow Moors estate. And I would like at this stage to echo the Chief Exec's vote of thanks to officers on the day, and subsequently my vote of thanks, I hope on behalf of members as well, to all the staff involved, but particularly Sue Fletcher and Chris Manby and Chris Dean and the Moors for Future staff, who led us on a walk out into what was a very warm day by the end of it, but a very interesting day, seeing the issues and activities that are taking place on the estate. It was well attended by members, but not by all. I realise there are other calls on people's time, but in future, if possible, to attend these tours, because they do give insights into our activities and our undertakings that might not otherwise be possible to achieve. On Tuesday of this week, I chaired the meeting with Derbyshire Dales District Council councillors here at Alden House, and this was on the back of the meeting that Phil and I had with the leader and chief exec in Matlock 5 or 6 weeks ago. It was a particularly useful meeting, I think, sharing issues and information about our relative positions, our opportunities and the constraints that we both face. And the suggestion that came from that meeting was that there should be a member and officer working party to take forward the issues that were raised, to seek mutually satisfactory conclusions, or at least solutions, if not conclusions, and that will be progressed. Excuse me. And then yesterday we interviewed for the head of assets and enterprise, and the post has been offered, but we're waiting for the candidate to consider their position. I think, as a final comment and looking to the future, on Tuesday of next week I shall be going to London to attend the funeral of Paul Hamblin, who was the chief exec of National Parks England until recently, and unfortunately at a very young age has succumbed to cancer and has died. Paul is someone that I had known when I was an officer, meetings with, particularly with meetings in Portcullis House with the then Minister at the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, and had other contacts with him. And he was very supportive, obviously, perhaps, as National Park England Chief Exec, of national parks and the Peak District in particular. So it's with some sadness that I have to report on that duty, if you will, but I shall be representing the National Park Authority. Thank you. If we move on to the Chief Exec's report, it has been issued. It's for information, unless there are any burning issues that anyone wishes to raise. We'll move on to item 7 in that case. Derbyshire County Council Safer Roads Scheme, A5004 Long Hill and A5012 via Gelia. Tim.
Chair. Okay, for those who don't know me, I'm Tim Nicholson. I'm the Transport Authority, I'm the National Park Authority's Transport Policy Planner. I just want to talk you through this report on the current Derbyshire County Council Safer Road Scheme proposals. So just a bit of background to start off with.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Just a bit of background information to start off with. The Safer Road Scheme approaches an ongoing programme of work funded by the Department for Transport. It's a rolling programme and it's aimed at the 50 riskiest roads in England, so as treatments take effect, other roads are brought forward. There were 4 Peak District roads included in the first tranche of funding in 2018. These were the A61913 Bens between Baslow and Bakewell, and that work's been completed. The A54 A537 Cat and Fiddle route between Buxton and Macclesfield, that work's been completed as well. And the 2 schemes that we're talking about today, the A5004 Long Hill between Buxton and Whaley Bridge, and the A5012 via Jellier between Cromford and Newhaven. Both of these routes are Derbyshire County Council routes. It's perhaps important to note that despite identifying 4 roads within the Peak District National Park as part of this treatment, the Department for Transport did not engage with or consult the Peak District National Park Authority, so did not effectively have regard to Section 62 of the Environment Act. So just a bit of background on the 2 schemes. There are a total of, I believe, 18 average speed cameras being proposed. A signalised junction at Grange Mill, including the Pegasus crossing, so for horses and for walkers. 14 street lighting columns at Grange Mill. Additional signage, additional vehicle restraint systems, so crash barriers, and improvements to stopping site distance, which is effectively tree and vegetation clearance, including away from the highway itself. Collectively, these measures will have an impact on the landscape and setting of the national park over several kilometres. And we are aware of a potential future scheme including a similar treatment on the A57 Snake Pass is likely to come forward. As things stand, officers of the National Park Authority have submitted a holding objection to each of the proposed schemes, initially due to a lack of supporting information, and the 2 holding objections are currently still in place. So if we could just take you through the existing average speed camera scheme within the National Park. It's on the A54, A537 Cat and Fiddle route. It's had average speed cameras for a number of years now, more than 10 years. They were introduced in response to the poor accident record on the route and particularly sought to address motorcycle casualties. At the time it was classed as the most dangerous road in the country. The cameras were the first average speed cameras in the UK aimed at picking up a rear-facing view to enable motorcycle number plates to be recorded. They are quite visually intrusive within the landscape. The photos shown were taken in March 2022. However, most of these gantries have now been replaced with a simpler and less intrusive design as part of the recent scheme, although one of the original ones, I think it's the one on the photo on the left, is still in location with an additional new camera pole at the side of it. So I just want to talk you through a bit of policy on average speed cameras. So we have our Peak District National Park Transport Design Guide. It's a supplementary planning document. It was adopted in 2019. The document includes a section on average speed cameras, and it recognises both their effectiveness and their impact on landscape, and it states, whilst recognising the traffic calming effects of average speed camera schemes, the authority is also concerned about the visual intrusion of such schemes. Given the visual impact that average speed cameras and their associated infrastructure have on the setting of the national park, the authority's preferred approach would be to use other measures to address the enforcement of speed in vehicles. The delivery of further average speed camera schemes should only be considered in extremis and may be opposed by the authority without sufficient evidence to support their introduction. And it should be noted that the impact of average speed cameras is not just the cameras themselves, it's the infrastructure that is associated with them to support their operation and signage required to allow enforcement. So just to go on to the A5004 Safer Road Scheme, it just shows the camera locations. So there are seven average speed camera sites. 3 are wholly within the national park and 3 are adjacent to the boundary. And if we look at the A5012 scheme, it's 11 average speed camera sites, 7 wholly within the national park and 3 adjacent to the boundary. So just to look at the proposed Grange Mill junction treatment, this is a diagram that was supplied by the County Council a few weeks ago. The proposed measures at the junction include a total of 4 average speed cameras, with 3 in quite close proximity to the junction, 1 further away down the road. A signalised junction at Grange Mill, including the Pegasus crossing, 14 street lighting columns, and gateway signage to accompany a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit in and around the junction. The combination of average speed cameras, traffic lights, crossing, signage and street lights means that this site will change drastically in appearance from a rural hamlet with little infrastructure at the current time or artificial light into what is an urbanised location with large amounts of transport infrastructure and intrusive artificial lighting. The scheme has the potential for negative impact on the setting of 3 listed buildings adjacent to the junction and on local scheduled monuments, and possible impacts include on those views from these monuments, particularly when the street lighting is on in kind of dim light, I would suggest. The second area where we have some concern is the Winster Junction camera location. It's adjacent to the junction to the road that leads down to Winster off of the A5012. The proposed location is on the north side of the carriageway. You can see it on the right-hand side of the upper photo and the left-hand side of the bottom photo, where it would be just adjacent to that gateway. It's required for enforcement because you've got the junction there. The location is wholly within the national park, has no screening from either side of the carriageway, and we believe that this will make the site visually intrusive in what is effectively, at this location, an open landscape on the White Peak Plateau. There are a couple of footpaths. Footpath WD 331 meets the junction adjacent to the proposed site, and given the nature of the landscape at this location, the camera will be visually intrusive for users of this footpath from some distance away. And in addition, there's a bridle way which joins the road about 200 metres away. And again, given the nature of the landscape, it's likely that the site will be visually intrusive to users of the route. But discussions are ongoing about a possible screening intervention to reduce the impact of the site on the wider landscape. So the key issues. Following ongoing engagement with officers from Derbyshire County Council, the authority's landscape architect and transport policy planner believe that the A5004 scheme can be accommodated within the national park landscape with minimal impact. And further, following ongoing engagement with officers from the County Council, we also believe that the majority of the A5012 scheme could be accommodated within the national park landscape with minimal impact. This is subject to Natural England consent because part of the scheme potentially impacts on the SAC at the bottom end of Via Gellia. As I've explained, the Grange Mill junction includes quite a lot of materials, infrastructure, so a signalised junction, 40 miles an hour speed limit requiring speed limit gateway signage, average speed cameras, 3 in close proximity, and 14 lighting columns. The Winster Junction is located in a very open landscape. The impact could be mitigated with additional planting. We also know that the A5012 will see a significant increase in signage to accompany other elements of the scheme. We have had engagement with the Department for Transport recently, and this indicates a recognition that national park authorities should be consulted early in the process. And it also demonstrates a willingness to seek a different approach moving forward, both for ourselves and for other national parks who are also likely to be affected by similar schemes. So to go on to the recommendations, The first is that members note that officers have or will remove the holding objection to the A5004 Long Hill scheme on the basis that the impact of the proposals can be mitigated. The second is that members approve formally objecting to the A5012 Viage Elias scheme on the basis that the treatments at Grange Mill cannot at this stage be sufficiently mitigated. And finally, that members note that there are ongoing negotiations between officers and representatives of the County Council and the Department for Transport on the A5012 Viage Elias scheme. And we're trying to reach a mutually agreeable solution, and that if an agreeable solution can be found, members approve delegating removing the formal objection to the head of planning in consultation with the chair and deputy chair of the authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. We have two speakers on this item. The first is Mr. Robin Heath from the Whitehall Centre. Ruth, where's the proposed location? Is it? Right. So, Mr. Heath, if you were able to come forward. Yeah, maybe you can squeeze through, I think. You're sufficiently slim. If you press the bar on the speaker, when you begin, you'll have 3 minutes,
Okay.
and the timer will let you know when your 3 minutes are up. So,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you. So, my name's Robin. I'm from Whitehall Outdoor Education Centre over in Buxton. We're part of Children's Services of Derbyshire County Council, and we work with around 6,000 young people every year, trying to give them a memorable and impactful and safe outdoor education experience in Buxton. So we have a few concerns specifically around the Long Hill work, not necessarily about Long Hill itself, but about proposed surfacing of a track that comes off of Long Hill. So once surfaced, this track will become significantly shorter route between Buxton and Chapel on the Frith, Whaley Bridge and Coombs, and it goes right through the middle of our land. And what we're concerned about is that because we use this track daily for all of these 6,000 people every year, either as a crossing or as currently as a path, because it is also a bridleway, that increased traffic on there, particularly from people trying to use it as a shortcut, might decrease the safety for the children we work with, particularly considering that it's up on top of a hill, and that weather up there is quite bad. I don't know if anyone's from Buxton, but it's not pleasant up there a lot of the time. It's really foggy, really wet, really misty, and the combination of increased traffic, children and poor weather to us means that we are going to get near misses or worse. And we're really concerned about that, particularly when it comes to tarmacking what is currently a rough track, because that also decreases the sound that cars will make, especially when we're moving towards more electric cars. And we think it's a matter of time before we have a near miss rather than if it's likely to or not. We've got a bit of evidence for this, so we have had near misses in the past, most of which have been avoided by the sound of off-road vehicles coming up, so it's quite easy to hear. We've had cyclists come down quite fast, which have nearly hit children, which we've managed to stop. We've also had problems with locals cutting through Whitehall grounds themselves, because our drive connects from Long Hill to Coombs as well. Just this week, we've had 2 different occasions when locals have tried to cut through, only slowed down by our speed bumps. If they'd have come in half an hour earlier, without speed bumps, they quite easily could have hit children. So we're concerned that that track will essentially make that more likely. We also work a lot with young people with SEND, children on the edge of care or in care who are prone to abscond, but also not only prone to abscond, but also often don't understand risk or don't have the capacity to understand risk. So they are likely to jump over the wall onto Long Hill, onto Old Road and walk up there, and they have done in the past, and they do so quite regularly. So we're not necessarily opposed to the surfacing of the track. What we want is some sort of traffic calming measure, no matter how quiet this road is, because we know it will be used by locals. It'll be a matter of days before locals start to recognise this shortcut. That's the end of our time. We want some speed humps, essentially, and some signs or road markings or narrowings. We've proposed this already to highways, all of which have been rejected on the basis that it might ruin the aesthetics of the Peak Park. We think, considering the proposal to put speed cameras and barriers on Long Hill, actually a speed hump and some signs wouldn't be that negative.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
If you could just put the off for a moment. Thank you. We'll take the next presentation, but consider your points in debate. So thank you very much. So the second speaker is Gary Thompson from DCC Highways, and it's been a right. So it's not Gary Thompson. He's delegated it upwards. If your colleague would like to, it has been agreed that you'll be given a slightly longer period of time to make your presentation. Yeah, try that, whichever. This one should be fine.
This one, okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, Gary and I are here to talk to you for about 10 minutes, I think. I'll just introduce myself quickly. I'm Kevin Parks. I work at the County Council. I'm Head of Professional Services. And Gary is?
Gary Thompson. I'm a project manager for DCC. I get involved in lots of projects to bring forward through to completion.
Okay, so we're here to talk to you about the Safer Road Funds. Tim's alleviated. There's going to be a bit of overlap between the presentations. Forgive me if we'd not seen Tim's before we'd come today. So yeah, we're here to talk about the Safer Road Funds, and we've been awarded by the Department of Transport. So the SRF was established to treat the 50 high roads, local A roads in England with remedial safety. Road safety engineering interventions. So a programme of these, we've been awarded a programme of 3 schemes, 13 bends, Long Hill and Viagelli, as we've talked about. So the aims of these projects is to improve highway safety, which passes through the Peak Park and reducing the number of collisions and the casualties that occur along them. So the DFT has commissioned the Road Safety Foundation to analyse the safety record of the highway networks across England and to prepare a list of the roads with the highest collision casualties. That report identified a number of the roads were at the high risk or medium risk in highway safety terms. Derbyshire's got 4 of these, as we've alluded to, within the top 50 of worst collision records. So the work on 619 on 13 bends already been completed, which was a high risk route, and the works on the 5004 and the 5012 form the current proposals that Tim's alluded to as well. And these have been classified by the DFT as medium to high risk. The other route, the Cat Fiddle, has a small section within Derbyshire, and that was taken forward by Cheshire East Council. We've not been asked yet to look at the A57, but we know it's on the pipeline, it's on their radar, we have quarterly meetings with them, and it's just a matter of time until, I guess, they seem confident that's going to get awarded to us at some point. So looking at the collision data and taking each of the roads in turn. So on the 5004, between 2012 and 2014, there was 35 collisions resulting in 50 casualties along the route. Eight of them were classed as killed or serious, and the remainder comprised of slight injuries. 77% of the collisions involved car drivers. 31% of those included motorcyclists. 11% were pedal cyclists, and 3% involved pedestrians. Police determined that inappropriate speed was a contributing factor in 17% of all the collisions. On the 5102, over the same year period, there was 27 collisions resulting in 40 casualties. 9 of them were classified as fatal or serious. The remainder were classified as slight injury collision casualties. 96% of the collisions involved car drivers, 22% involved motorcyclists, and 4% pedestrians. Police again determined inappropriate speed was a contributing factor in 22% of the collisions. So contrary to the cabinet paper that you can all see, the all user groups suffered casualties were not just motorcyclists. The collision data is collated by the police and represents real people being killed or injured on the highway network within the P Park. We need to really both work together to bring down these collision casualties for the benefit of and well-being of the park users and visitors and everybody that uses the park. So as the County Council, we're the Highways Authority, we've got a statutory duty to reduce collisions and collision casualties along the network that we're managing. We have undertaken, over the years, we've undertaken many low-impact safety improvements in the past, but they've seen a low rate of returns in collision casualties, as can be seen in the figures just mentioned. So the government's recognised this and then has allocated funding through the Safer Road funding, hence to get to the position we're in now, to allow us to do comprehensive and holistic review of all the routes. And we therefore need a strategy for dealing with the collisions and particularly the excessive speed use. Collisions along the route and just not in hotspots. So we're proposing the use of average speed cameras to monitor vehicle speeds, encourage compliance within the speed limits. Experience on the Cat and Fiddle has demonstrated an 82 to 94% reduction in collision casualties depending on the user group. So therefore the proposed safety interventions, sorry. So on the 0054, we're proposing to modify the A53 and 5004 junction within Buxton itself to address turning conflicts. A new cycle off-road route is proposed along Manchester Road to link with Old Road, with an improvement to increase priority to footway users, and Old Road will be improved to offer an alternative route to the 5004 for cyclists. So improvements for pedestrians will also be made along Merville Road, Farm Road, and new junctions within Whaley Bridge. New road junctions within Whaley Bridge. We propose to increase visibility at bends along the A5004 by trimming vegetation so drivers can see the hazards ahead. Road markings improved at various locations to encourage better lane discipline. If funding permits, new road restraint systems, that's crash barriers, and take them to be upgraded with bike guard and new installations proposed on sharper bends. So on average, a cyclist is injured every year on the 5004, which is why we're maintaining Old Road as to provide a safer alternative route. And the scope of work which the Whitehall Centre, I know, has expressed a concern over the increased traffic along the route and sought additional safety measures. These have been considered and currently discounted by the county's traffic team, as the measures are sought are considered not to be necessary now, keeping with the rural setting. We have been gathering evidence of before and after effects to verify our thoughts, but we've been given an undertaking to revisit the safety needs at this location if the problem is realised post-installation. Our standard approach is to determine the safety requirements based on evidence rather than just a fear that something might happen. So moving on to the 5012, the Viagelli route, we've got similar treatments as the 5004. So a lowering of the speed limits along within the Grange Mill area from 50 to 40, and west of Grange Mill from 60 to 50, based on the feedback from the public consultation. And so in our opinion, reducing the speed limits lead to a reduction in collision casualties and less severe injuries, as demonstrated along the Cat and Fiddle. So it's our aim to enforce the full extent of each speed zone using average speed cameras at the start and finish point, with intermediate points where major junctions occur along the route. So members' attention's been drawn to Grange Mill by Tim, and the number of cameras in that vicinity. So local to that vicinity is 2 cameras, one in each direction within the hamlet to enforce the 40 and those running potential red light. the signals. So not to do so would allow speeding through the junction and have potential detrimental consequences. And then average speed cameras are needed needed either side of Grange Mill to enforce the start and end of the 50 limit. And one camera is located 600 metres east of Grange Mill at the Lills property, and the other is located 125 metres west of Mahogany Cottage and is partially masked by the large advanced directional sign. We consider these to be sufficiently distant from Grange Mill as to not detract from the rural setting that Tim's outlined before, and sought to mitigate the visual impact by placing one next to a residential property and another by a large directional sign. So 5 collisions have happened at Grange Mill, resulting in 12 slight casualties. That's over that period I mentioned earlier?
No, it's over a longer period.
Oh, yeah, over a longer period, okay. So they've all involved motorcyclists trying to enter the 5012 from the side roads. Installing traffic lights will allow people to turn in greater safety. We'd like to retain the street lighting at Grange Mill Junction, as this would enable the signal design to incorporate the Pegasus crossing and allow for cycle, pedestrian and equestrian users, but it needs to be lit to comply to the standards. And we note that Peak Park's desire to keep the rural setting free of artificial light. So today I'd like to offer to members that we can remove the street lighting, saving the 14 columns, but it would mean losing the Pegasus crossing. We'll leave that for you to decide. Having looked at repositioning the average speed cameras at the Keeper's Cottage, we have looked at repositioning the average speed camera at the Keeper's Cottage, but the other locations will have similar detrimental impacts within the Peak Park. The proposed position is best for enforcement and detection reasons. We offer to seek to mitigate the impact of this average speed camera by installing planting in the highway verge, but can't do that so at the detriment of highway safety because of overhanging branches and interfering with junction visibility. Planting on private land would be reliant on a third party, and that is outside of our control. So members can see that we've engaged with the Peak Park throughout the project's development and collaborated to ensure that collision reduction ambitions can be achieved and the Peak Park interest be safeguarded. We're at a point where there are a few areas that remained unsolved, but which are necessary to create a safer highways environment for users at the Peak Park. So therefore we're asking members to support the need of average speed cameras at installations at Grange Mill, support the signalisation of Grange Mill due to the collision benefits that will arise. We note that we've offered to remove the street lighting at Grange Mill, but we would not be able to install the safer signalised crossing point for the non-motorised users. So that's a member decision here. Second to last is support the average of speed camera installation at the Keeper's Cottage, understanding the screening limitations available for with the need for third-party agreement, and finally to support the wider interventions to create safer highways within the Peak Park. Thank you for your time, and Gary and I happily answer any questions as much as we can.
Okay, thank you very much. Perhaps if, given the paucity of seating, perhaps if you'd like to take a seat either side of Mike, who I think has to leave. Okay, right. Thank you. Okay, members, you've heard the officer presentation and the comments from our two sets of speakers. Contributions, comments, questions? Patrick, then Nigel, then Andy. And
yes, thank you, Chairman. I think the recommendation in front of us is the right recommendation. Still, I hear the compromise, and I think there's something in that. But I think it does need a bit more application in the detailed discussions of this. I always find it interesting that when you go to France, for example, they come up with the most amazingly imaginative and decorative road schemes which calm traffic in a way which preserves the environment, slows traffic down, and actually is, you know, nice to look at. And we always seem to end up with these rather mechanical, light-driven, white line on the road, camera things, when I'm sure there must be more acceptable solutions one way or another. I'm in no doubt about the fact that the Grange Mill junction is not very clever, but I do have the feeling that that what is proposed here goes beyond what's necessary to deal with the immediate problem there. And I think we need to just work on it a bit further to see that we get the best out of it. I'd just like to pick up the point that the gentleman from Whitehall made. One of the things that worries me about this is a lot of the reasons why we're having some of these problems, particularly with motorbikes, is because the Cat and Fiddle has a scheme like this, and of course is no longer providing the excitement that was required. So Long Hill becomes the next casualty, and presumably the Via Giulia as well. And I think what's going to happen over time is we're going to squeeze people off one sort of road, and they're going to be going on to another. And I know the road that we were told about behind. I used to know it as the Roman Road, but I don't think it was, behind Whitehall. And if you're not careful, that will become an invitation as an alternative for motorbikes. And if you take this further, once you sort of do this on Via Giulia, and you've done it on Long Hill, where next? And it'll be down the A6, and I can tell you, if you live in Taddington and you're sitting there at the weekend, you will know all about the A6 and its motorbikes, and nobody does anything about them. It'll be the A515, and it'll continue and it'll continue. And the environmental consequences of that for the local communities are going to be very considerable. I do have some reservations about these schemes, but I know they're inevitable. I'm happy to move the resolution as it is, the motion as it, the recommendation as it is, on the understanding that we do look a little bit flexibly at the suggestion that's just been made around the lighting at Grange Mill, and in the hope that we can really work on the hard landscaping and everything and make this as viable as it can be.
Thank you, Patrick. If you could put your microphone off. Thank you. Nigel.
Yes. So I'm the County Councillor for Chapel and Hope Valley, which neighbours the two electoral divisions that cover Long Hill. And so I know that road quite well, and it is a magnet for thrill seekers, both motorbikes and young men in hot hatchbacks. Locals consider it a dangerous road. Any scheme to reduce speed is incredibly popular amongst elected local politicians because there is a constant demand for speed reduction schemes. Now, the two local members will have seen this consultation before it became a proper consultation. They'll have had pre-consultation advice, and they will have been clapping their hands because this is what the people who live near them, their neighbours, want. And at the back of my mind, the Snake Pass, which relies on these schemes becoming a success, is next on the list, and that's in my division. And I know that there's towns such as Bamford that are screaming out for speed reduction. It is not the case that the Snake Pass will become worse when Long Hill becomes better. It is already terrible. And clearing them up one by one seems like a sensible safety approach to highways planning. That's my...
Thank you, Nigel. Charlotte Farrell.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with what Patrick was saying actually about France doing this a lot better, because one of the things France does is actually place restrictions on the speed that vehicles can go at physically, which is what DCC is totally not prepared to do. I've had numerous discussions with them, with the safety officers, with highways, etc., over road safety. I've been campaigning about it for a long while. And ultimately, they see maintaining the speed of the vehicles along roads at 50 miles an hour as their priority. And we know that vehicles often go faster than the speed limit. That's why we're having these speeds restrictions. What we need to do is actually start slowing the cars down and making the roads safer for all the users, which they could do by using the examples, from France. I just find it completely laughable that they're not going to put restrictions on the Roman Road near Whitehall because it's out of context in a rural setting, but yet they're prepared to do whatever on the Via Gellia. I mean, it's just ridiculous. We've got to stop putting cars and motor vehicles as priority and think about other road users. They could put cycle paths along all these roads, which would narrow the roads and therefore slow vehicles down that way. There are other means of doing this. But having said that, I feel torn because, I don't want more people killed, but anyway, that's what I think.
Thank you, Charlotte. Ken Richardson, then Matt Butler.
Yeah, you talked about, you discounted the Whitehall Centre solutions because of evidence. Well, you're fundamentally changing the road from a track to a road. So I would urge you to reconsider that consideration. Also, when you talked about taking the crossing out, the lights the street lights would need the crossing taken out. Why not pedestrianise the crossing junction? And also, this is classic case of police not doing the job. Mobile speed cameras is a far more effective measure because you don't know where they are. And I've got a motorbike.
Was that a confession, Ken, or? Okay, I think we'll move hastily on. Matt Buckler.
Yeah, I'm the ward member for Derbyshire Dales for Bonsall and Winster, which Via Gellia goes through, and a keen cyclist, and so I'm delighted to hear about some of the moves to reduce the speed of traffic on the Via Gellia, because that the road junction at Grange Mill is petrifying as a cyclist. However, I think converting, the urbanisation proposed is significant. That road, that location, Grange Mill, is in the middle of nowhere. You go there at night and it is completely black. So I think that the, as has been said, the proposals to really urbanise this bit of the national park is a mistake, even as somebody who is one of the people that you're trying to benefit from doing it. I am also concerned about some of the stuff, and I'd like to see what Natural England are proposing to do with the SAC and SSI at the bottom of Via Gellia, because some of the things that I've seen proposed for the woodlands there, which are going to be significantly impacted by ash dieback. There is going to be significant reduction of trees from ash dieback, but that sort of wooded valley is sort of archetypal of this bit of Derbyshire, and so some of the proposals that I've seen for that, which is basically making that not wooded valley, is really concerning.
Thank you, Matt. Andrew Gregory.
Thanks, Chair. Well, I often drive along the A5004 on my way to these meetings, Chair, so I'm very familiar with that stretch of road. And I've driven along it to these meetings in the middle of winter with snow, and it is a seriously scary road in those circumstances. So clearly, these plans are welcome. But at the same time, it is also, all right, and I would say this because it's in my patch, but it is got some of the most stunning scenery in the Peak District along that stretch. And therefore, I do hope that the way in which the cameras are a situ and the association equipment with it will be as unobtrusive as at all possible. Because the other route for me is along the Cat and Fiddle. And yes, those cameras are an eyesore, frankly. And they do spoil the view. And again, I've been travelling that trip for many, many years before the cameras and since. I think what I would say, I would be happy to support the recommendations, and I'd also commend Tim for the work he's done in actually getting to a point where we're getting, it seems, the right balance between protecting the landscape, but at the end of the day, also following through on clearly a need for greater measures for road safety, because as I've said, and I'll finish on this as I started, it is a seriously scary road.
Sure. Are you seconding the...
I am.
You are, thank you. Bill first and then Patrick, if you don't mind.
Thank you. Yeah, just a few general points, picking up particularly from what Patrick and Charlotte said. I think we can be more imaginative at dealing with road space in terms of reducing the space in terms of road colour, surface, design, without intruding into the landscape. And that's not just done in France, but a lot of European countries, the Netherlands I know very well, does it very well. And drivers get used to it, and it is a pleasanter experience. And I would also say, I don't want to offend colleagues here, but I think it's... I think in Hathersage, where I live, it's the highways have got a reputation for wanting to move traffic. That's your part of your remit, I suppose, from A to B, but without as quickly as possible. And I think, in our modern society, we ought to think about all road users and think about the environment of the Peak District. I mean, and for you to, consider other ways of dealing with traffic, slowing it down, people might get there just as quickly. And I think also working with the police, and I think Ken mentioned lack of enforcement. It's very easy, traffic speeds along between Bamford and Hathersage, it's very dangerous, very noisy. Every summer weekend, it's just the noise of motorbikes, that's all we have every weekend. That is enforceable. There seems to be a lack of willingness. Please work with the police as well, and that's another way of doing it. But I do think there are other things that haven't been talked about here. Roundabouts, possibly mini roundabouts, traffic calmings on the road or the roadside that look attractive and do the job. Also, I know this is intrusive, but smiley faces, for some reason there's a reluctance to have smiley, sad faces. I find that, for me, that's the most effective way to slow you down. For me, it may not affect other people, but you know exactly what's going on, so I think most people like to see a smiley face, but I know that's a bit more intrusive. But there doesn't seem to be a range of proposals put here, and that's for Whitehall. I do have every sympathy with the colleague from Whitehall on making what is obviously a safe and usable track for them. I'm not quite sure where it is. I've tried to look at the map, but I think I understand where it is. But making that a through route it does adversely affect what is a very important centre and a very important facility in a very important bit of landscape. So, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. A final comment from Patrick.
Yes, Chairman, I'm just going to comment actually on what Bill had to say. That wasn't what I was going to say. I think the most effective thing I've ever seen for slowing down traffic on a windy road was a road I went along in South Australia, where they had a marker on the side of the road, a red one for people who survived, and a black one for the ones that died, at every point where an accident took place. And I can tell you that was very thought-provoking. What I'd like to do, Chairman, if Andrew would agree, is slightly modify my motion in relation to recommendation
Okay, thank you for that. I was going to raise that because I think we need to take note of that issue, because it does seem to me, and this is not perhaps an unusual situation, that what we're looking at is requesting prevention instead of cure. That we need someone to be injured, we need someone to die perhaps, before it's then reviewed and preventive measures are then installed, which seems to me, I understand that there has to be a justification for installation of such measures, but I do think that in these particular circumstances, given the nature of the users, the pedestrian users, that some consideration of prevention before evidence of need is provided would be appropriate. I think also, as a general comment, as a number of members have remarked, we're looking at the continual cascading of traffic from one area to another, as there's a kind of wave effect. Put in restrictions, it moves to somewhere else. Put in restrictions, it moves to somewhere else. And it seems to me that that's reaction rather than proactive intervention in considering what the impacts of measures might be. And I think we ought to be looking at ways of considering those impacts at the time these measures are going in. We're already acknowledging that the A57 is the next target. I must admit, I was surprised to see how many of Derbyshire's roads are deemed to be the most dangerous in the country. But if that is the case, then surely we ought to be looking at it holistically rather than on a case-by-case basis, is my thought. But Lydia, if you'd like to make the final comment, please.
Yeah, just quickly again about that road behind Whitehall, which I know very well, having grown up in Whaley Bridge and live in Buxton now. It's also agricultural, so there's farms that farm with animals both sides of the road, and that would have a massive impact if you've got traffic coming screaming past. So again, prevention rather than cure, and surely it's more economical to build into the scheme now than have to revisit it later after accidents.
Yeah, okay. So members, we've heard the proposed amendment to the recommendations. Yeah, could you clarify more precisely what it was you wanted, Patrick and Andrew?
Well, I think actually it must be to reflect the wording in recommendation 2 that members approve formally objecting to the A5004 on the basis of that lane, that road, and that you're given the opportunity to negotiate and get the objection out, as happens in
Okay.
recommendation 2.
Are you able to make appropriate?
Does that make sense?
Yeah. We'll just wait for Ruth to transcribe that, members, and then it seemingly not. And then if Ruth can read it back so we're quite clear about what it is we might be voting on. What's that road called? Old Road. Old Road. And it would presumably mean that we have to amend a recommendation 3 so that we would seek to note ongoing negotiations for both roads. So if you made that A5012 Vigelia and A5004 Long Hill schemes, that would cover it? In the recommendation 3. Middle of third line. So where it says A5012 Vigelia and A5004 Long Hill schemes. If you could just read those amendments out so that we're quite clear what it is we're voting on.
So recommendation 1 will become that members approve formally objecting
to the A504 Long Hill scheme on the basis of objections to proposals regarding Old Road. Was there something else?
I think that's near enough. It's really about on the basis that we need to know what's happening on Old Road and what can be done to safeguard it, really. But that's near enough.
Okay. Are members comfortable with that? Anyone object? Right, okay. And Andrew, you're happy to second it still? And then recommendation 3 is just the addition in the middle of line 3 of, as we were rehearsing, it would read A5012 Vigelia and A5004 Long Hill schemes, and the rest remains in place. Members happy with that? In which case, the recommendation has been both moved and seconded. Can I have a show of hands of all those in favour, please? Any voting against? One. And any abstentions? 1. So thank you for that, members. I think you've heard the flavour of members' concerns and hope that you can take those issues away and resolve them through negotiation with our officers. Okay, thank you very much. If we move on to agenda item 8, which is the Programme and Resources Committee Programme Plan for 2023-24. Who's speaking to that, officers? And Emily Fox will be speaking to this item. You want to slow this round? Yep.
Morning everyone. So the report in front of you today is to agree the Programmes and Resources programmes for 2023-24. If members recall that when the committee was established, it was agreed that it would focus on 3 to 4 programmes, and last year we refocused the programmes around the 4 National Park Management Plan aims. This report is seeking to approval to continue around the 4 management plan aims and sets the order for each of those aims. Due to the timing of the report, the climate change aim has actually already been discussed at the P&R committee earlier this month. But looking forward to the future, it's proposed that landscape and nature recovery comes to the December meeting, welcome in place comes to the January 2024 meeting, and thriving communities comes to April 2024. The recommendation in front of you is to approve this sequence. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. We have 3 speakers on this paper. So if I could call Roger Savoury to the... If you press the bar, the red light, yep, you've had 3 minutes from your start. Mr. Savoury?
I'm here to talk about Cresbrookdale. For the benefit of those not familiar with the case, a group called the Phoenix Rose bought 72 acres of land between the SSI and the Cresbrookdale Nature Reserve in June 2022. Their plan from the outset was to develop this land into an eco-community with people living permanently on the land, and they clearly stated they had no intention of applying for planning permission for anything. They built a car park, erected a teepee after digging out the ground to make a flat area, dug paths into the ground, installed toilet tents, installed a caravan, added some poorly constructed wooden steps along a section of the land, and put up tents permanently on site. The Peak District National Park issued a temporary stop notice in July 2022 and issued a planning contravention notice. The planning contravention notice was ignored by the landowners and not completed by the deadline. No further action was taken by the Peak District National Park Authority until April 2023, when an enforcement notice was issued but it only included the TP car park and steps. The deadline for removal of the TP car park and steps was 22nd of August 2023. On the 23rd of August 2023, I contacted Andrew Cook from the enforcement team, pointing out that no action had been taken by the group to comply with the notice, and he said he would visit the site in the next week. The enforcement team knew about the 22nd of August deadline back in April 2023. Why does it take a member of the public to get them to visit the site to check that enforcement has been complied with? In April 2023, a horse van was installed on the land with someone living on site permanently, using the horse van and the caravan as part of their living arrangements. The Peak District National Park were notified of this new development at the time. After the permitted 28 days, the Peak District National Park Authority were notified again. It took the Peak District National Park Authority until July to take any action, when they issued another planning contravention notice, which the landowners again ignored. No further action was taken by the authority. It is clear to me that the enforcement team is ineffective, even with simple tasks such as answering the phone or replying to an email in a timely manner. And I really don't appreciate being told by Phil Mulligan that repeated correspondence with the enforcement team diverts resources from actually progressing the case. I emailed Andrew Cook on the 19th of September asking when action would be taken. No reply. I emailed again on the 22nd. Again, no reply from the enforcement team. I sent 2 emails. If the first email was replied to, I wouldn't have had to send a second email. If
Mr. Savoury, I must stop you. This is not relevant to the paper in hand. I can't, this is a planning committee issue. If you have issues to do with this, the Cresbrook issues, then planning committee is the most appropriate place to bring it to. We're here to talk about, members are here to consider the programme of work for the Policy, Programme and Resources Committee, not the planning committee.
Aren't the planning committee part of the resources?
No, they're a delegated committee from this authority. It's a separate
We have
committee.
been told that we're not allowed to speak at the planning committee meetings.
That's my understanding is that from time to time on enforcement agenda, people have been unable to speak, as I believe Cresbrook residents were enabled to speak at an enforcement agenda item at a planning committee previously.
And then the subsequent one we were told we were no longer allowed to speak.
That's my understanding is that there will be steps taken to enable that to occur. But I have to say, if you and even the other 2 speakers are going to pursue just Cresbrook, it's not appropriate for the item that we're considering in authority.
I'm amazed that you can spend so much time talking about the appearance of speed cameras, and yet you can't take swift action against illegal development at
My understanding
Cresbrook Dale.
is that Cresbrook, that we know that the stop notices, the enforcement notice has expired, and that steps are being taken to enforce subsequent to that expiry.
When will that happen?
I cannot give a date as to when that will happen, because that's a hostage of fortune for all of us. So I'd be obliged if you would step down now. Thank you for raising the issue. It is in hand. Good, Charles?
Can I just ask officers whether or not they were aware of what the speakers were coming to talk on, because it's been a bit of a wasted journey for them, and they probably would have been better directed in raising their concerns.
True.
When members of the public ask to speak, are we not asking them to say on what and to what end?
Brian, can you enlighten us at all?
Well, on this particular
Sorry.
We only found out a couple of days ago. It was just the speakers list, really, so I didn't know what the content was.
Yeah. The assumption has to be, as far as I am aware, and Ruth will speak in a moment, that if someone asks to speak on an item, then the assumption has to be that they're going to speak on the item that is being addressed in that paper, not on something that is extraneous to it. But, Ruth?
Yep, our scheme allows for people to speak, give notice to speak on items on the paper agenda, but what they say needs to be relevant to the report that's before the members. For planning committee, we do ask whether people are speaking in support or against an application, but it's harder to ascertain views on reports for other committees and meetings. But we will take that point forward and note it for next time.
Andrew?
Can I just say, whilst I understand Charles's point, I think we need to resist any temptation to start grilling members of the public and what they're going to come and say to this forum in the interest of transparency and openness.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but at the same time, we expect members of the public to address the issues that are being rehearsed in the paper that's before us. So I would ask Claire Gamble, John Oxspring, are you addressing issues that are... Okay, thank you very much. If you'd like to take the seat then. You have, once you start, no, you've switched it on. No, you're okay. You've just switched the microphone off.
Oh,
it was on, still on.
So, sorry, I thought it meant off. Sorry.
You have 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you. What I want to comment on it is to do with this, but it is to do with references to nature recovery on this report. And specifically, what I would like members to think about when they cover this issue is how they intend to protect the wild places once you've created them through nature recovery. For example, I know Cressbrook Dale is one example, but it is one of the most protected landscapes in the country. The jewels of the crown of the Peak District. In terms of nature recovery, it only needs the care, ongoing care to maintain its present condition. But at the moment, that protection has completely failed for over a year. 10 years ago, an officer from Natural England who also worked part-time for the Peak Park set up an ambassador scheme for Cressbrook Dale, a team of volunteers that included me and my husband that extolled the beauties of that area to the public. How do you think we would explain what's happening there now? Because for nature recovery to succeed, as indicated in your report, you're going to depend on volunteers more and more as cuts kick in. How do you think volunteers will feel if you continue to fail to protect Cressbrook Dale? Volunteers will quickly lose interest if you are seen to let the land that they have worked be degraded. Why should volunteers put in hard work when someone else could come along and undo it at any point with no meaningful action taken against them? Nature recovery without protection is meaningless. Enforcing the protections on this special landscape is your job, and no one else can do it. I won't go into the bits that I think has gone into, but what was still there on Cressbrook. Roger's mentioned that. So I will just skip to the bit where I say, so while you take your laudable steps to nature recovery, don't forget, once you've created a special place for nature, you have a duty to protect it. We want you to succeed in this. And please don't treat us with contempt. One of the reasons, we've come here really to speak is because we've been prevented from speaking at planning committee. Because if you fail to protect Cressbrook Dale, you will fail elsewhere as well. So members, please make sure that you use the enforcement tools that you have to protect nature recovery when hopefully you do maintain and even improve the beautiful landscape that we all live and work in.
Thank
Was
you.
that relevant?
Yep, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the third and final speaker, John Oxspring, if it's appropriate to the paper. Good morning.
I'm in the same situation. Maybe some of this is more directly appropriate to planning meeting, but some of it, I believe, is certainly relevant to nature recovery.
Can you make it as direct to nature recovery as possible?
There is a paragraph here that says...
That will be fine.
Where do I press?
It's live, you're okay.
Oh, is it on?
Yep.
That says, much has been said of the authorities' aim of encouraging nature recovery. Cressbrook Dale does not need to recover. It is already as close to natural as you can get. What it needs is protection. The authority have repeatedly said that the main reason for the delay and lack of action so far is the lack of resources. Surely, though, the authority must recognise that the longer this is allowed to continue, the more damage and the greater the momentum there will be, making the situation that much more difficult and more expensive in both human and financial resources in the long term.
It is always easier to stop something happening in the first place than to have to stop, or worse still, reverse it later on. This isn't just for the benefit of Cressbrookdale, but for the whole of the Peak District, indeed the whole country. If the landowners are allowed to treat the authority and the planning process with such utter disdain and basically be allowed to get away with it in a place as highly protected as this, it can only serve to embolden others to do the same elsewhere. It needs to be stopped, and it needs to be stopped quickly. I passionately love Cressbrookdale. Help us to help you, work with us, support us. It is the least thing that the authority can do. I believe that part at least was directly relevant.
Thank you. We'll take that on board, as we already do.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I'm
Sometime-
going, just to carry on, our concern is the length of time that it's all
Sure,
taking.
sure. Sometimes the processes that we have to go through
Well,
do
it's
grind
15,
awful
nearly
slow.
16 months now, and that's
Yeah,
the concern.
appreciate that.
And we're trying to help.
Yeah, and
we're an ally. Support
we
us.
understand. Thank you
We'll
for
he-
that.
we'll help you.
Yep, thank you. If you don't mind, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Members, we have a recommendation on the table. Does anyone wish to? James?
I'd like to move the report.
Thank you.
And whilst noting that I'm sure the chair of PNR is sitting on my right, that protection of such special sites as been mentioned today will be in consideration of landscape and nature.
Indeed. You took the words from my mouth. Janet?
Yeah, thank you. I'll second this report. But I did listen to the members of the public on Cressbrookdale with interest, and it does remind us that when we're looking at these programmes, they shouldn't be looked at in isolation in terms of their themes, but in relation to each other. There was mention within Nature Recovery also about welcoming place and volunteering as well, and those two fit together. And the committee and the officers will make sure that we're aware of the complexity of each programme as we look at the detail of them within PNR.
Thank you for that. And for those members of Cressbrook community who are here, it's not that we don't care, it's not that we don't listen. We have processes that we have to go through. We have other calls on our time that sometimes for folk for whom an issue is right on their doorstep is a huge issue. We have to prioritise on occasions. It's not through lack of interest. It's not through lack of application. We will get there, but the pace sometimes doesn't meet the pace that you would like us to move at. It's not that we're ignoring it. It will happen. I was there on Monday having a look at it. So we will be moving on. I hope you aren't unduly offended by my trying to cut you short, but we have to focus our time as well on the issues that we need to address at particular committees. And I do hope that you'll be able to bring your concerns to a future planning committee where they have been addressed before. So it's not an enormously positive farewell, but I hope that you'll take some succour from that. Thank you. We have oh, sorry, Patrick.
Thank you, Chairman. You actually basically said what I was going to say, but I would just add the rider that if you read your newspaper and you see court cases and how long they take a lot longer than 16 months do sometimes. And there are legal processes which do take time. And we do have an enormous number of other serious cases to look at. Cressbrook is not the only case, and we have to put that in its context. The second thing I would make is that I think this discussion has thrown up the need for us perhaps to look at the rules surrounding our public access to meetings so that those rules are absolutely clear and that the public does have a proper means of access to tell us what they're thinking about what's going wrong. I think every local authority represented in this room will have such a process. Ours is very restricted, and I think we need to review it. The third thing, it's about the report, actually, funnily enough. I'm slightly confused about what this report is about, actually, the more I read it. And I'm trying to, as you will know, my main interest all the time in this is the Thriving Communities heading. And I'm trying to work out what is the sort of product that will come out of this. We've got this 26th of April 24 date. What is the product? What will be the thing that will come out of it at the end of the day?
Okay. You want to pick it up?
So that will be a report that looks back at all the work that's been delivered under the Thriving Communities heading since the last P&R report.
Which is the one that was about 2 months ago. We had one on Thriving Communities. So it's just an update of that. Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
It's an update on that, but it's based on the Sustainable and Thriving Communities aim and the management plan and the objectives as part of that. So it's not monitoring those, but it's talking about the detail behind programmes and projects that are looking to deliver against those objectives and that aim.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay, if there are no further comments, we have a recommendation that has been both moved and seconded, I believe. In which case, can I have a show of hands? All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's unanimous. Thank you, members. We move on to agenda item 9, the appointment of interim monitoring officer. Phil, are you going to speak to this? And Phil Mulligan will be speaking to this item. You want to go? Oh, of course. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, members. This is a relatively short item. Previously, members appointed Ruth in her previous role to be the interim monitoring officer. Ruth's role has changed, and with a new job title, members now need to reappoint her as the interim monitoring officer in that new role.
Move it, Chairman.
Seconded by Ginny, moved by Patrick Janet Haddock-Fraser.
Sorry, can I ask a question on this? I noticed in your CEO's report you said we'd now appointed an authority solicitor. So we will get another paper coming to us in due course when that person's in post to then make that person the monitoring officer. Is that right?
I'd need to check. I think members have already approved a new structure that has the authority solicitor as the monitoring officer, so you shouldn't need to appoint the new person coming in to be the monitoring officer.
Okay, well, can I ask when the new authority solicitor is starting then?
I haven't got an exact start date, but they had a notice period to work,
Lovely.
which from memory was 3 months, roughly.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew?
Really, it was only just to say, just for everyone's benefit, that I took part in the interview process for the new authority solicitor. And suffice to say that I'm delighted to hear that we've appointed the candidate that we agreed upon at the panel, Phil. And all I'd say in relation to that particular person is that I think she's going to be a great asset to the authority. She is just to manage expectations, she's relatively young, but she is a very able and competent lawyer, in my view, and she, I think, will grow and develop with the authority. And as the authority develops and grows with its new structure. I'm looking forward to meeting her when she joins, and I've already pledged what support I can give to her in the role. I don't know, Phil, whether you want to say anything more about that.
Okay, it's been moved. The recommendation has been both moved and seconded. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's unanimous. Thank you, members. Item 10 then. We need Ruth back, do we, to speak to this?
Yes.
Brian, can you drag Brian, can you drag Ruth back in, please? Metaphorically, yes.
Listen at the back. Do we need anyone to really present this paper?
I don't know. Nobody said they... Didn't realise she wasn't there. Page 57.
Thank you, Chair. This report is just detailing the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman Annual Review Letter for April 2022 to March 2023. And you'll see that there were two complaints dealt with and neither were held during that period. And those complaints were reported as part of our monitoring and performance reports to the authority that are made twice a year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Annabelle?
Are we ready for member contributions?
Yes, member contributions. Annabelle Hardy.
Thank you, Chair.
We'll get there in the end.
So it occurs to me that the speakers who were here before might have been better addressing this point, since it addresses another of our very problematic enforcement cases. And I have to say, I feel a bit uncomfortable that the Cresbrookdale residents felt they had to come and speak to something unrelated just in order to get their voices heard on this. I do believe that our planning teams are doing everything that they can do, and they're doing it as fast as they can do it. So in that sense, I don't think we have a governance issue. However, there is a clear disconnect between the people that we are here to serve and the information that they're getting about whether we are doing everything that we possibly can do. That's the message isn't getting through somehow. And I do feel that a concerned group that have, feel that they've gone through all the proper channels already and don't see progress or don't understand why there isn't progress, need to understand so that we're all on the same side. And they should have some way of accessing members to bring forward those concerns. So I really feel that, perhaps we need to do something like having a regular update at the end of planning committee where both members and interested members of the public can get the up-to-date information on what's happening on cases that they request information on.
Yeah, I think that it's a concern that has existed for a wee while. It's one that is developing. I think Patrick has quite rightly made the point that we need to review how we handle that. As I understood it, the issue was around the way in which we report enforcement in planning committee. It's for members to note issues, so it's not a forum for debate necessarily to include members of the public. I think we need to review how we handle that in order that we don't have these kinds of episodes where people become desperate and then try to get their views across in inappropriate.
Because these are some of our key stakeholders, people who live in the park and are very fond of the park and want to defend it. We need to be working with them in a constructive way. And there's a second systemic point I'd just like to quickly make. And this relates to what's been in the news about Sycamore Gap over the last couple of days. The issue of how we protect our landscapes, cultural heritage, how we protect through planning and in other ways. Clearly, the planning enforcement process is not working particularly well. I know we have the problem of long-running enforcement. And I think this is something that goes directly to our purposes, and we need to be looking at this at a strategic and governmental level and saying, look, we need to have a better way of dealing with these people who, when issued with a legal notice, will just ignore it. and keep the clock running.
A couple of members have indicated they wish to speak, but before that, I'd like Phil to make a comment.
Yeah, thank you. I don't want to disagree with you as such, Annabelle, but I do think, from my perspective, there has been a lot and regular communication with this particular group and in general on planning matters. But inevitably, we don't satisfy everyone's particular need or expectation on what's communicated and when. I place great emphasis on communicating with people. We are increasing our planning liaison capacity from a part-time role to a full-time role. I repeatedly tell Brian and Andrew Cook, make sure you're letting people know. You know, we are significantly increasing resources into enforcement, but I think that however much we do communicate, and remember Alistair Campbell, you just have to do it all the time. There will still be some people for whom that feels not to be enough. Now, on top of that, with some cases, we can't actually communicate what is happening because there are legal proceedings, or there is a kind of a strategy involved that might mean it takes some time before we can take the next step. And again, that means that people feel they're not hearing from us, but we cannot actually let them know necessarily what is happening. What I do in those circumstances, and I did to one of the people who spoke here, is assure them that things are progressing. And it is actually true that the more we get correspondence from people who feel they are not being communicated with, that does actually distract resources. I then have to go to officers, ask them for an update. They're taken away from actually doing the enforcement. And I appreciate that's not a message that lands very easily with people, but it is a reality. And I wanted members to kind of hear that from me.
Thank you. Bill Hanley? Yeah. And then Charles.
Just following on from what Annabelle said, and I've sort of only been to 2 planning meetings, committee meetings, but I do think that there is space within that. There are some quite lengthy reports on documents which we already have, but I think there's space in that for any big issues to have updates regularly and monthly so that members know what's going on. Perhaps nothing's happened, but I think that is one way, and I agree with what you just said, Phil. It's an awful lot of time spent, toing and froing with letters of objection. But if it's a regular agenda item for some of these big issues, then everyone gets a chance to review it. It may be that nothing's happened. It may be it's just, 2 minutes, nothing's happened because X, Y, and Z. But I think that would give support to who effectively are our constituents, and to know that we care, and we do care. You care. We all care very much. But it's then visible, isn't it? And I don't think that would take too much out of the monthly meetings, just to have those sort of updates on big issues that this is obviously going on. And then hopefully every so often there will be a progress and some interaction with our constituents on that. So it's just an observation, really. I think also at planning we could perhaps celebrate more, and I've said that to a number of you, all the permissions that are given in the preceding months. And I know that coming from where the parish I come, there's a general perception that the Peak Park only refuses things. The vast majority of applications are approved. So there could be a minute, it will take a minute or two to celebrate all the things that have happened that have been good. So we present that public face. And what the Peak Park is fantastic, but we've got to keep pushing that forward and find time to do that.
Sure. No, I completely agree. I mean, we approve something like 83% of our planning applications, but very few people hear about that. It's a comms issue. Charles.
Thanks, Chair. For me, there's 2 quite separate issues here. So if we take what they came to speak about, well, to me, that's just about expectations and communication. Enforcement, there'll be a raft of cases. The more awkward somebody is, the longer the enforcement takes. Everybody always wants it dealing with immediately. There's priorities. So I think the issue there is the expectations, the communication. Mm-hmm. The bit that I've got a concern about, and why I wondered why officers weren't aware of what they're coming to speak on, and I'm not sure whether or not our agenda item is actually lawful. So if you look at the wording for agenda item 4, it states that people can only engage with us on matters relating to the actual agenda. So if somebody wants to speak to us on a general point, we prohibit them from doing so. I don't think that's lawful. If somebody's coming to speak on an item, it would make sense to have them speak whichever one it is. To expect citizens, residents, to understand our processes and where they should speak and when, I think is unrealistic. I think perhaps if we look at the wording of other authorities, so I've quickly looked at North Yorkshire and South Downs, their wording is quite open on the public participation. That is for members of the public to speak to the authority. There's no limitation beyond that, other than the amount of time that they're given to identify themselves in advance and to provide a brief summary of the purpose for which they're wishing to speak. And I think that would be a sensible way for us to go. Those folk have come to speak to us because they're really concerned. I get that. It might have been headed off perhaps if the planning team had been able to engage with them effectively. But to be told that they can't speak at planning, which I would have said was the appropriate meeting, my guess for that is because of the wording of our public participation. So they'd have been told you can't come to speak on it because it's not an item on our agenda. So instead they come to a meeting that they think they can attend, and it all goes off at tangents. So I would ask if our officers can just review the legality of that, and even if it is lawful, I would suggest that we move to join every other authority that I've ever known of, which allows free public speaking at the start of the meeting.
Sure. Yeah, I think that is a thing that we'll take away and review. But I think it's a tad disingenuous for folk to say they weren't allowed to speak, because my recollection is that they have been allowed to speak at planning committee.
But historically, you know, they haven't.
Sure, but more recently
we had some very strong representations from another equally urgent case a year ago, and there was a bit of an outburst at the meeting, and officers were asked to report back again at the next meeting on this, and we made the report one that had to be open, so that they were able to come and speak. That was a nonsense, really. They should have just been able to have spoken at the time. But actually it was quite useful because it started this discussion. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm very happy to note that this report. But I'm going to move that we do, and I'm going to move an amendment to the recommendation that a report is made to a future meeting on the operation of the public participation scheme at meetings, so that we can review these things formally. And it may be a discussion that can be had through the governance working group, or it could be through another vehicle. But we need to get this right. So that's my motion, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. I think that reflects the mood of the meeting. So I think that would be appropriate to make that amendment. Do you have a particular wording, or was it as you spoke in order that Ruth...
It is that the report be noted, and that a report be made to a future meeting of the authority. That the report be made to the future meeting of the authority on the operation of our public participation arrangements at formal meetings of the authority.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Janine. Members comfortable with that amendment? Anyone object? In which case, on that basis, I'm sorry, Ken, if you feel I'm... Are you...
I'm just going to comment at Barnsley. We have questions by the public, because that were a question, what the hell's happening?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
And they get written responses.
And different local authorities have different... I appeared at a York City Council meeting where I was cross-examined by members, you know, which it's another authority, it's a different way of operating. Nigel, you want quickly, please?
Yes, I was just going to echo what Charles has said. I haven't been to a public authority before that didn't allow general questions. The closest to the national park that I've been to is a sort of non-political body, Derbyshire Fire Authority, where they require 5 working days notice of questions, and they appear at the beginning of the agenda, and it is a quite tense atmosphere when this happens, because these are people with grievances, but I think it diffuses many of the angry issues that occur by having that space for them to just say, this is what is on my mind.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. Final point?
I promise you, just a word of caution. A lot of people will have a lot of comments about this authority, believe me. We will probably take up 3 meetings worth of people asking questions about their satellite dish, etc., etc. I've got no problem with being open and honest.
Of course we should do, but in the consideration of that which Patrick has suggested, that it be looked at separately, I do think we need to think about managing that particular expectation. And with the greatest respect, I like the analogy with the fire authority, but we are not Derbyshire Downs District Council, we are not Kirklees, we are a different authority. So I think we need to bear that in mind.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Thank you. I think
Chairman, can I just say, in my experience, if you put a slot like this on an agenda, it is time limited, and statements which should not be made, could not be made, are allowed to be circulated separately. They're allowed to put their statements in writing or whatever, and questions that remain unanswered will be answered afterwards in writing, circulated round members, so that everybody knows what's going on.
I think we take away all these points and make consideration and come forward with some recommendations in due course. On that basis, members, we have an amended recommendation, which I'm not going to attempt to repeat, but everyone has nodded their agreement to it. So can I have a show of hands in favour of the recommendation? Any against? Any abstentions? That's concluded. We have one final item on this agenda for which we have to vote on excluding the public from the meeting. I don't think there's any members of the public. Oh, there is one, 2 members of the public, if you don't mind, gentlemen. You'll be allowed in subsequently. Yeah. I assume that was where they were from. Have to wait for the doors to close.